reciting the opening chapter of the Quran, Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, Sirata allazina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Ameen. First of all, I want to thank Fatima that on a short notice, she agreed to give this talk. I goofed. I should have realized that beginning of last week that we had a slot today because Imam couldn't be here to give the lecture.
He is actually treating people for the Sunday.
Yeah.
That's why he is not here.
Yeah. So Imam could not give the talk, and so I was tardy in arranging something. So thank you, Fatima. I also want to welcome Mr. Michael Williams. He's a new convert. I tried to dissuade him, but he's very good. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
Consider this your home.
Thank you.
Yes. So Dr. Al-Hayani has chosen a very interesting topic, repressed voices of Muslim women. All of you know Dr. Al-Hayani, but I'll take just 10 seconds to tell you that she has been an asset to the Islamic Center, long-term member. She taught Sunday school. She taught most everything which people do at the Islamic Center. She has a doctorate in Islamic fiqh from University of Michigan. Has been teaching all her life, and she is a sort of a speaker on Islamic topics. And it's wonderful to have her daughter. I enjoyed this interaction. She said, "Mom, come here." And I said, go back 40 years. She says, "Mona, come here." How things change. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to start with is this topic came up a few years ago in Michigan. I'm a member of the Scholarly Dialogue in Michigan, where scholars come and speak on different subjects from different religious and philosophical backgrounds. And one of the statements that came up was, you Muslims claim that you liberated women, but we don't hear anything about your women. Their voices are repressive. I said, oh my. So the dialogue went 3 hours. Now I'm trying to summarize all that in a few minutes. So you have to bear with me if some of it might be disjointed. Initially, I would like to say that the word repressive is not the correct word. I believe that we are using the wrong term in this context of Muslim women. It would be more apt to use the term ignore. For in fact, that is what has been gradually happening to the voices of women beginning with the 2nd century after Hijrah. To begin with, the term repression invokes an active. Now you have to forgive me, I'm a linguist, and therefore I'm very much into languages and the terms and the meanings of words. To begin with, the term repression invokes an active, a concerted effort to halt, to block, and in so doing, an admittance of its existence. Whereas to ignore is to disregard, to overlook, to dispense with, to deny that something of importance or worth comes.
Fatima, can I stop you?
Sure.
Can you hear in the back? I wondered if the speaker is working. Have you tried
Yeah, I turned it on.
that? Oh, the microphone will have to be high.
I do.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Can you hear me now? Better?
Better. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So anyway, whereas to ignore is to disregard, to overlook, to dispense with, to deny that something of importance or worth commenting on even exists, which in my opinion is a much worse situation. This is what has happened to women's contributions and voices throughout the last 1200 years. To reach this point, a gradual but consistent effort, be it directly or indirectly, has led commentators, writers, scholars, or imams, who, by the way, are mostly men, to ignore contributions, literature, and scholarship by women, which in turn led not only to the usurpation of their rights and voices of women, but also to ignore their contributions. There were many reasons that contributed to this situation. To begin with, one must acknowledge the revolutionary laws brought forth by Islam to free women and to give them privileges denied to them both in the Arab world as well as in other parts in the Middle East and Europe. And you all have to recognize the fact that it's not only the Muslim women who are ignored or repressed, it's all over. It's in Christianity, it's in Judaism, it's in everything. It's not just us. Similarly, some of the new converts to Islam reneged the payment of zakat. I'm sure all of you know, if you go to the history of Islam, immediately after the death of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, a group in Arabia decided not to pay zakat. They said, the Prophet is dead, and we were paying zakat to him, and we're not going to pay it anymore. And of course, Abu Bakr, who was the first Khalifa, shone a war against them to bring them in. And there are people who criticize that. But the point is, if you give up zakat because the Prophet died, the zakat did not go to the Prophet. Zakat is a mandatory fard, as we say in Arabic, in Islam. Therefore, some of the social behavior and applied traditions of their society vis-a-vis women also changed as well. In order to support our assumption, i.e., that there was a concerted effort to ignore the contributions of women or to even acknowledge that they are as competent as men, we must look at the women surrounding the Prophet ﷺ, and their influence, contributions and roles during his lifetime and throughout the first decades after his death. His wives, daughters, and other Muslim women were full participants in the learning, memorizing, teaching, fighting, and contributing not only to the spread of Islam, but also to the understanding of the laws inherent therein. Beginning with Khadija, Muslim writers refer to her continuously as the exemplary wife, who was the first believer and who clearly participated in the Prophet's efforts to spread Islam. Now, most of the time we hear about her financial situation, how she hired them, how she helped them, which is great. But she's a lot more than that we need to recognize and accept. Even before the first revelation, she was a rich woman who was significantly older than the Prophet. And this, I would like to really concentrate a little bit about that, because my essential area of study is family law. And when the Prophet married somebody 15 years older than he is, I like to see any man throughout my life who married a woman 15 years older. If we want to follow the Prophet, which we all must do, let's do that. But it doesn't happen. So we pick some and we drop some. She was independently wealthy and a sharp businesswoman who hired the Prophet, of course, before she initiated marriage proposal. And that's another thing. She asked him to marry her. She didn't need anybody. I mean, it's great. If I like someone, hey, how about it? But it doesn't happen. Why? Why did it happen then and it's not happening now? Or it hasn't happened in the last few hundred years? After the first revelation, it was her encouragement and her strength that supported the Prophet. Now, this is a very important issue to me. Everybody talks about the financial support, which helped a great deal. But the emotional support and the courage she had to push him through. I'm sure most of you have read the chapter Al-Muddathir. When the Prophet got the first revelation, he was shaken. He was shaken. He was sweating. He was scared. But who uplifted him? Who gave him the strength to move on? Who stood behind him, regardless of what anybody was going to say? It was Khadija. And if you think that's not important, to me, that is a very essential point in the life of the Prophet Muhammad. She was his greatest supporter in more ways than one, on whom he depended greatly for courage and strength throughout his years of preaching and suffering. Furthermore, the Prophet never married another woman until after Khadija's death. Now, this is another topic that I may in the future talk about, the many wives of the Prophet and why did he marry that many. I mean, I tell you, when you go and lecture to non-Muslims, they say, you mean he had that many wives? But they don't understand what kind of wives did he marry. I mean, and why? And that's another topic. We'll talk about it another time. After hearing this story repeated over and over again, one wonders how could the early and modern scholars ignore the role of women and their equal contributions in all areas? How could they state that a woman's worth is half that of the man, or she has half a brain, or that her voice and opinion is worth half that of a man? Actually, I'll give you an example. I was lecturing one time, and a Muslim who has a PhD, as a matter of fact, told me, yeah, women don't have the same brain as men. I mean, they're not qualified. Historians mention another very powerful and effective woman, the wife of the Prophet, Aisha. All of us have heard about Aisha, for sure. She was young, she was opinionated, she was forceful, challenging and influential throughout her life, before and after the death of the Prophet. Because of that, and even though she is quoted often, she was attacked during the time of the Prophet and after his death, because the society at that time refused to accept the changes and the reforms that Islam introduced to assert the rights of women. And this is a very important point. Society influences the behavior of people. Society imposes on people a force not to change. It's there. There's no question about it. During her lifetime, she was accused of unscrupulous behavior. I'm sure most of you know about this story. An accusation that became so vociferous that God sent a revelation to clear her name. Verily, those who brought forth the slander against, of course, Aisha, are a group among you. Consider it not a bad thing for you. Nay, it is good for you. And to every man among them will be paid that which he had earned of the sin. And as for him among them who had the greater share therein, his will be a great torment. Meaning, when you accuse someone, and we all have that problem, we see something and all of a sudden this malevolent thought comes to your mind, and you shouldn't do that. And this is what God is talking about. The Quran continues, why then did not the believers, men and women, when you heard it, meaning the slander against Aisha, think good of their own people and say, this charge is an obvious lie? So what is the importance of this? I'd like to relate this to the honor killing that is going on, that has been going on throughout the ages among Muslims and Arabs, even non-Muslims. This is really a statement from God that you should not believe the lie. And even if somebody told you something, verify. Do not accept it as if it's complete. It's done. It's true. Verify it. Why did they not produce 4 witnesses? So I'm sure you all know family law. When you talk about adultery, You cannot accuse anyone for adultery unless you have 4 bona fide humans with a very good background, no lying, no cheating, no stealing, no felonies, to see the act itself, which in fact is an impossible feat. It's impossible. So you cannot accuse someone like that. Then with Allah, they are the liars. Later, she headed an army, went to the mosques and public places to recruit fighters for her cause. As a result, she became known as the woman who caused fitna. Fitna means someone who causes trouble, who causes division among the society. She was accused, and in some sects today and throughout history, she's really shunned. She's being insulted because of that. That's another lecture about why she did that, but this is not the time. And she was accused of dividing the Muslims and creating the schism between the supporters of Ali and the rest of the Muslims. Despite all of this, there is a plethora of scholars who consider her as a source when they needed clarifications of certain hadith or even explanations of certain behavior of the Prophet concerning certain issues. They sought Aisha's advice, explanations, and elucidation concerning many legal and religious subjects following the hadith. The hadith said, which is a true hadith, take half your religion from Aisha. If that is the case, how could she have half a brain? I mean, there's such contradiction. And many Muslims look at these contradictions, but they don't see them. They don't accept them. They don't analyze them. And it's kind of sad in a way. Even during the time of the Prophet, he had to assert the rights of women and to challenge any discrepancy between social behavior and decrees set forth in the Quran. And of course, we have a story that might come later. I will talk about that. After the Prophet's death, even though many reverted to following some customary practices, still women could challenge the caliphs concerning their rights. And an example of such a situation happened during the time of Khalifa Umar, who during a Friday lecture advised women to demand a lesser dowry. You know, we have 2 dowries, the initial and then the later dowry. And he said what they're doing is these demands have become so prohibitive that many men could not afford to get married. So a woman who was praying in the mosque challenged him. Now, this is a very interesting point. When a lot of Muslims today want women in a different room and a man in a different room, a door for a woman and a door for a man. I mean, look at this. Here is a woman in the mosque with Khalifa Umar. And if you don't know Umar, maybe one day I'll do a lecture on Umar because he's a very fascinating Khalifa. He was very stern, very powerful, very strong. People feared him quite a bit, but she challenged him. I'd like to see a woman today come and challenge certain imams. God forbid. So she said to him, how can you? She cited the Quran and reminded him that God did not decree a limit to the dowry, so who was he to do so? He agreed with her and stated in public that Umar erred and the woman was right. I mean, that's another beauty about Khalifa Umar. I think that's why I named my first son Umar, maybe. Throughout the early periods, such was the situation whereas women took an important role in the society, be it as scholars, fighters, businesswomen, and so on. They even gave their bay'ah, which means a vote. Like when the Prophet decided on something other than religious, meaning to pray or to do pilgrimage or whatever. They decided something dealing with social issues or war issues. They would go like this, and that's their bay'ah, that's their vote. Yeah, we agree with what you decided. And if they didn't, they don't do it. I mean, look at that. We're talking about 1400 years ago, and they had the right to vote. In America, not too long ago only, You are allowed to vote. The same as the demand so to the Prophet on issues pertaining to political and social decisions that he made and which were not of religious nature. The hadith statements of the Prophet abound with example as to the respect and rights of women. Another point that I'd like to mention is the Quran uses always feminine and masculine grammatical structures. Why is that? I mean, when you deal with language, you need to understand why certain words are used and certain words are not. When the Quran, al-mu'minina wal-qanitina wal-qanitat, as-sabirina wal-sabr, why do we have the two genders equally stated? There is a reason for that. They're on equal par. So the structure denotes what is expected of both, and the rewards and punishment for both is the same. Duties and responsibilities are the same, except for the fact that men must support their wives due to childbearing and child raising. In the following centuries after Hijrah, there were many muhaddithat, women who memorized the hadith, and were sought to help when needed, which means that they were active physically, they were active financially, they were active in many ways. Many were also scholars who memorized the Quran and learned jurisprudence and were able to give fatwas as well. How many of you have heard of any women doing that? Hardly any. I gave that question one time to a seminar, and there were a lot of Muslim women who supposedly really know Islam. They couldn't mention even 2 women. Others were deeply entrenched in the worship of God. They became Sufis, sought the world over, and revered. Rabi'a al-Adawiyya, I mean, if anybody is interested in Sufism and women's Sufism, you should read about her. I picked her book in Beirut, it's in Arabic, and her poetry. And I did a lecture at Lourdes talking about Rabi'a, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. Others were poets whose poetry was on the same level and in the same cases better than the male poets. As time went on and the Muslims controlled many areas in the Middle East, North Africa, and part of Europe, there came a subtle change affecting the status of women. The voices were still there, but were not recognized. If you look in Al-Andalus, which is in Spain where the Muslims were there were many writers who were women who wrote, but not in their feminine names. It's very interesting, but that's not unusual. If you look at George Sand, who was a French writer, she was a woman, but she had a male name because they didn't accept women. There are 2 volumes called A'lam al-Nisa, or Women Notables in the Arab and Islamic world, that list many women who have contributed throughout history in all areas. During their lifetime, they were recognized only to be ignored in the future. I did bring 2 volumes of those, so for anybody later, if you want to, you can look through them. They're all in Arabic, of course. One hears of Aisha, Khadija, Fatima, but only as supporters of the Prophet, not initiators. And I think this is very important. We are followers, not initiators. And that bothers me sometimes. But rarely as contributors to new ijtihad, new or different legal opinions. Instead, and since the 13th century, most scholars regurgitated the interpretations in what is called taqlid, imitations, ignoring the contributions of women. Most later scholars have decreed that all new studies to address current issues facing the society are not necessary. We already covered them. We don't need anything. They don't realize that society changed, the world changed, the needs of a family have changed as well. This is not to say that there have not, by the way, if you see different fonts, it's on purpose. So you don't fall asleep. This is not to say that there have not been new ideas or new attempts at revisiting the old interpretations. The fact remains that for all intents and purposes, not much innovation or reinterpretation addressing the status of women have come to light. A certain process followed, a process that crept into the Muslim society and its stand vis-a-vis women. The societies in Arabia, the Persian and Byzantine empires looked at women as dependent, unequal to men. Furthermore, and to exacerbate the problem, many Muslims followed the Old Testament, blaming Eve for the original sin, a point the Quran denies. It is explicit in the Quran that Eve was not the cause, as is depicted in the Christian and the Jewish scriptures. She was not the culprit that brought Adam to sin and thus brought forth a life of strife for all generations to come. There can be no question pertaining to the first incident of disobedience by Adam and Eve. The Quran clearly states that Satan spoke directly to Adam first. Then Satan whispered to him, Adam, saying, "O Adam, shall I lead you to the tree of eternity and to a kingdom that will never waste away?" But then, and look this, in big letters, Eve followed. Was she the culprit? No. After reading this verse, we find Muslims' narration of the hadith repeating the story as it appears in the Old Testament and quoting a hadith that stating that if it weren't for Eve, no women would have betrayed their husband. Another hadith states that I have not left after me fitna, mischief, those who draw into temptation, more injurious and harmful than women. Now, these are hadiths. And if you don't check whether this hadith is sahih, meaning correct, there is tawatur, meaning continuity. If you don't have continuity in a hadith, it's a link, a chain link. If one link of the chain is missing, the hadith is not acceptable. But if you read Ibn Kathir, let's say, you read a page and I gave a lecture on that one time here. At the end, he says, this hadith is weak or spurious or whatever. So why do you have it? So if you don't read the rest of it, you don't know. Other hadith quote the statement by the Prophet as saying, as I was on my way to heaven, I looked at the area of hell and found that the great majority in hell are women. I mean, really. These hadiths attributed to the Prophet served misogynistic mindsets which existed in the society at that time and unfortunately still persist today. To bolster the belief that women are inferior, which in essence depletes their worth, these concerns the issue of women as witnesses as well. They use that as a pretext to why women are not equal to men. And those dealing with inheritance laws, according to the scholars' interpretation. And it would further support the unequal status of women in Islam. It is obvious that as most women's voices are ignored, and I want you really to concentrate on the word ignore. I hate to do this, but languages are important. When you ignore, that means not important. When you repress, you acknowledge it's there, but you choose not to follow it. So ignoring is worse. And only male scholars are recognized that the juridical deliberations concerning women's voices have become male-oriented. There exist two situations in the Quran that interpreters utilize to support and bolster their view regarding the inferior position of women in Islam. These are the testimony of a woman as a witness, shahada, and the law of inheritance. In the first case, the Quran speaks about contracting a debt or a business transaction among the Muslims. This is about shahada, witnesses. The verse states that a debt should be recorded in the presence of two male witnesses or one male and two females. But the need for the two females is elucidated. If one of them errs, إن تضل إحداهن, which means if one of them forgets or made a mistake, the other could remind her. Now, the point here is, if she didn't err and she didn't forget, do we need the other one? No, we don't. But that is not taken into consideration. This is a conditional situation and not a general rule, but that has been taken as a general rule. Moreover, it does not assert male superiority and expertise over women on the basis of gender. For example, if I were to talk about chemistry, which is Dr. Saleh Jabreen's forte, I would be terrible because I wouldn't know anything about it. So I couldn't be a witness to that. But if he is going to come and talk about Sharia, which is my forte, my area, he might err, I might be okay. But that's not been taken into consideration.
I will not.
But it's a point to address. I mean, everyone has a strength, and according to your strength, you go. There are many men who are terrible in business, and I've seen that in my lifetime, who have gone bankrupt and all of that. So what makes them better in business than women who have succeeded in life? Unfortunately, the interpreters and commentaries have gone beyond the lexical and grammatical explanation of this verse. They implied that men need no reminding. Oh God, you men are so super. Of any details, whereas women have weaker minds and could not recall facts or information as do men. Well, let me tell you, I've talked to a lot of men, many of them have problems, and so some women. I'm not saying no, but although Al-Shafi'i limited this application to cases dealing with business and financial application, Abu Hanifa extended its application. Al-Kashani, who is a Shiite mullah, has considered this conditional statement as unconditional because women are inherently weaker than men, more forgetful, and intellectually weaker. Well, I tell you, when I talked to my mother-in-law in Iraq, she remembered stuff from 50 years, stuff that her kids don't remember, her husband doesn't remember. So where's the weakness? I don't get it. The other situation is that of inheritance. Now, I've had in the past just 3 weeks 2 questions asking me about what should they do with the inheritance. They're in a dilemma. I mean, the inheritance laws in Islam are very complex, and people are really scared what to do, what not to do. Since women receive half the share of the male, it gave more support to interpreters that a woman is worth half a man. Although the Quran is clear in stating the financial obligations of the man to support the wife, the children, the family members, be they parents or siblings, and their children, little notice is given to that fact when addressing the status of women. Now, let me explain something about the inheritance. When a male gets a full share and the woman gets half a share, there are stipulations, there are conditions. The man has to support not only his family, he support his brothers, his sisters, their children, his mother, his father, his relatives, all of them. And I will tell you, this is not being applied at all. I mean, in one of my classes, one of my students at the university told me that she inherited land in the West Bank, and her brothers refused to even give it to her, not only give her half the share. Why? Because they don't want part of their land to go to a stranger. And who is the stranger? Her husband. But it's okay to have their wife and inherit from them, that's okay. But that has gone on, which is wrong. And to go to the court because she asked me what to do. I said, you can go to the court. She couldn't go to the court. Why? Because her family told her, you're going to dishonor our name. You're going to go to the court and say your brothers have not been fair. So shut up. She did. And that's bad. She should have fought for her rights, I think, anyway. A wife, even though she's wealthy, she's not supposed to support herself or her family. And the Quran accorded the dowry upon marriage which belonged to her only. Thus, to receive one half of the share of a male is an inheritance seems very generous. Everybody says that. But you know, I have seen very many women whose husbands are not supporting them well. They don't give them money to spend on their own. Yes, they buy their clothes, let's say, or whatever they think she needs. But nothing more than that. I mean, if a woman wanted a few $100s just to spend, I remember my son was working and I was talking to his wife and she was saying something about money and I said, she doesn't work. I said, what's going on? She said, well, so I looked at my son, I said, is she getting an allowance or something? And no, I said, really? Well, I buy everything. I said, really? She needs an allowance to go. If she wants to throw it in the street, I really don't care. But you need to give her an allowance to feel good that she can get some stuff that she needs, that she wants, besides the necessities. And this is something a lot of people don't recognize. And then, of course, today, it's no longer the case. Most women are working with the men. And they have joint accounts and they spend both their salaries on the household. So how does that fit with that? Why should, when the man dies, she gets only 1/8 of what they own, when she has contributed at least 50%? It makes no sense. But you know, I've talked to judges and imams and scholars, and they have no answer, and they don't want to touch it. They don't want to touch the issue. Although women were not acknowledged, that did not deter them from producing either in literature or in legal areas. In many cases, their work was presented by men. But it was during the Revolutionary Wars against colonialism that women reasserted themselves and fought side by side with men to liberate their countries. In the early 20th century and until the 70s, there were learned men who supported the rights of women also, be it in education or work outside the home. Among them were Muhammad Abdu, who was the Grand Mufti of Egypt, and Qasim Amin, who was a great writer. And they repeated the hadith of the Prophet about education. You have to realize most women were not allowed to get even an education. And we're talking about 1920, 1930, 1940, not too long ago. And they said the Prophet said that Muslims should seek knowledge even if he or she must travel to China to obtain that knowledge, which is not a small deed. So why are we curtailing the knowledge of women? This movement was somewhat halted by many factors, by the way. Not the least of which is the feminist movement. I have to put this in because I lecture a lot about that. The Muslim feminists tended to disregard Islamic. We have two groups. We have those who shun Islam totally, say archaic, old, doesn't fit. I'm not going to bother with that. Then you have the others who become more religious, cover even their faces, stay in the house, man is superior and I'm inferior, and this happened. On the other hand, conservative groups labeled any advancement or program to enhance the status of women as an attack on Islam and the Muslim family. Individual women goals became a danger to Islam. I have to come up with something to explain about colonialism. One of the reasons, I mean, we can fault Muslims, etc., but one has to be fair. I went to American school in Lebanon, in Beirut, private school, but they were missionaries, Presbyterian. The American University of Beirut is a Presbyterian college, university. Their mission is to convert us. My father, I was in the school 5 years, and my father didn't know I was in that school. He was afraid that I'm going to be converted. And this happened in many, many areas, many countries as well. So I can understand why they put this wall. Don't change anything. Don't touch anything. Because that's what the non-Muslims want us to do. Forget about religion. Forget about the modernism. Forget about all of that. Stick with what you have to protect your religion. And I will tell you that what opened my mind is they used to take us to the chapel in the morning. And one day we had to sing hymns. So one day, I was 7 years old, by the way. Here was this song. Onward, Muslim, Christian soldiers, marching on to war with the help of Jesus. I said, oh my God, this is the crusade against us. So I went to the teacher. I said, I'm not going there, and I'm not singing that song. You want to kill us? But you see, there was a reason why they stopped that. But we haven't overcome that hurdle. Colonialism is gone, but its roots are still entrenched in our minds and in our culture and in the way we think. Either we throw away everything that is modern or European or American, or we go the other way, like some feminists did. No praying, no Islamic practices, none of that. So these Muslim feminists, some of them, tended to disregard Islamic practices, and many became secular to the detriment of the cause. Why is it detriment to the cause? Do you have an idea why? Because whatever good reform they wanted to bring was technically rejected. Because you're not Muslim, so how dare you tell me what I should be doing as a Muslim? So really, they hurt the cause more than they helped it, to me. Maybe somebody else might think otherwise, but I don't think so. I think they did. On the other hand, conservative groups, as I said, labeled any advancements or programs to enhance the status of women as an attack on Islam. There were others who debunked many Muslim practices and were labeled dangerous to the preservation of the Muslim family structure. I tell you, I had an imam from our center, not recently. He said, you shouldn't be teaching at the mosque, at the university. I said, why? He said, there are men there. I said, so? Well, they're going to hear your voice. So? And then you have conferences in a room by yourself with a man. I said, yeah, the doors are open and there are many other offices next to me. What the heck is going on? And he said, you shouldn't shake hands with any of them. Why? Because the guy might have some bad thoughts about touching your hand. I said, if that's the case, that's his problem, not my problem. I don't have any of these thoughts, so I'm not going to worry about it. But you see, this is just not too long ago. And then the other thing, some wore all types of hijab, began to attend halaqat. My sister is one of them. This is haram, and this is haram, and this is haram, and this is haram. And you shouldn't say that. I'll tell you an example. I was going into the mountains with my sister 3 years ago. And here were these churches with the bell and mosques, etc., etc. So the bell of the church was ringing, and And my sister says, Astaghfirullah al-Azim, Astaghfirullah al-Azim. I said, why? What's going on? I said, you know, there are 3 mosques that call the adhan 5 times a day, and they're listening to it. So what's the big deal? But you see, this is what the halaqat do, some of them. I can't say all of them, but I've attended some, so I know. Of course, some of them do say that feminism, Western feminism, is intent on breaking the Muslim society by corrupting the Muslim woman. Why isn't it corrupting the men? I think the men are getting just as corrupted as we are, if that's the case. Now, Dr. Lamia Al-Farouqi writes, Islam and Muslim women generally advocate molding of individual goals and interests to accord with the welfare of the larger group and its members. The Muslim woman regards her goals as necessitating a balance with, or even subordination to, those of the family group. She does not mention that the Quran holds each person as responsible for his or her act. The Quran is very clear. It says, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. Nobody carries anybody's sin. I tell my kids that all the time. They hate it. But I keep telling them, you don't want to do it? وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. Your problem is your problem. Doesn't bother me. I told you what's right, what's wrong. The rest is your problem, not mine. There are numerous verses to that effect. Thus, each person must act according to his or her individual belief and set of rules. She also advocates that there is equity between man and woman, but with a difference. This is an oxymoron, I think. I mean, there's equity, but there's a difference. It's either equal or it's not. The male is responsible to provide for the family, and the woman should take care of the children. She further states that if there is inequity, it is not in Islam, but Muslim societies. Unfortunately, she does not address the means through which women can remedy this inequity when their voices are ignored and when the judicial system is stacked against them. When I talk about judicial system, I will give you an example. I had a niece whose husband left her for 22 years with a child. No support, nothing. When she went to the judge in Beirut to get her divorce, as you know, Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine, in some cases, they follow the Hanafi law, which means that a female cannot initiate a divorce. A male has to do it, unless she has the asma in her hand, meaning before she married, she makes him write a note saying she has the right to initiate a divorce. When he went to her, when she went, I went and talked to him. So what are you talking about? According to most of the schools, if a man does not join his wife physically 4 months, she has a right to divorce. If he doesn't support her 4 months, she has a right to divorce. This is 22 years. So instead, what did he do? He sent investigators to check her friends and her family to see if she is a decent woman, that she doesn't fool around. And I really, he and I had big fights. But finally, she did get her divorce. No one denies the rights that Islam gave to women, but after the first few decades of the beginning of Islam, they seem to have been forgotten. Here is a question. In the narration of the hadith, how many women were cited as narrators besides Aisha? How many of you can name any of them? Hardly any. Here's one. Zainab bint Amr bint Ahmad bint Amr bin Amr bin Abi Bakr bin Shakr. She related hadith in Damascus, Egypt, Jerusalem, and Medina. Amina bint Muhammad al-Rashid al-Qahiri narrated the hadith, approved by Abu Huraira and others who took hadith from her. Asma bint Umais narrated over 60 hadith. Asma bint Yazid bin As-Sakan al-Ansariya narrated over 80 hadith. Zainab bint Abi Salma, jurisprudence. She's a scholar in jurisprudence, in fiqh. I tell you, one time I was introduced as a scholar in fiqh, And the man that I was introduced to, when he heard that, he looked at me and said, like, is that for real? Like a woman shouldn't be doing that? And I tell you, in some universities for Islamic studies, they don't want a woman to be teaching Islamic law. Anyway, and then Zainab bint Abi Anas Muhadditha. She's a narrator. There are also many poets as well. Al-Khansa, I mean, she was one of the most important poets at the time, poetesses, let's say. And she was a favorite of the Prophet, who considered her Ash'ar al-Nas, meaning the best of poets. I mean, what better compliment is that? There are hundreds of them, but we hear nothing about them. They wrote poetry when they lost their brothers and sons for the sake of Allah. And by the way, this is a very important point. In those days, women were willing to sacrifice themselves and their children for the sake of Allah. Today, if our son or daughter is going to do something just a tiny bit dangerous, stop them. I mean, if you're doing something for the sake of Allah, let's not forget Khawla bint al-Azwar, who covered herself and fought with the men in such a way that Khalid ibn al-Walid was amazed and wanted to know who was that amazing fighter. There were hundreds of jurisprudence scholars and physicians as well who were sought by male and female Muslims to get their advice and get treated by them. How about Khawla bin Thalaba, who challenged Khalifa Umar? This I like, because I like to challenge people, I guess. Umar told him, she told Umar, she stopped Umar and taught him to fear Allah as a leader as he rules his constituents. So when somebody objected forcefully to her speech, the Khalifa Umar reminded him that this is the woman that Allah heard her complaint and answered her. Therefore, Umar must listen to her. Time. I don't know. I'm sure you know the story because this is Surah Al-Mujadila. This is the woman whose husband said, "You're to me like the back of my mother, that we cannot join together anymore." She went to the Prophet 3 days, but there was no revelation at the time. And she kept going and asking the Prophet, "Is this for real?" And then the revelation came. He said, "The only one who is like your mother is the one who gave you birth, but nobody else. So get back to your wife." But at the time, now, in one lecture, somebody challenged me about that because for 2 days, the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not answer her. He said, "You need to follow al-urf, the practice of the community." Because at that time, he didn't have the revelation. And he could not decree something that he did not receive a revelation about. But here is a Khalifa who was so mighty. Listen to her. There are legal scholars, Asma bint Yazid, Zainab bint Ahmad bint Umar ibn Abi Bakr. They contributed 80 hadith quoted by Abu Dawood, Al-Tirmidhi, and Ibn Majah, Zainab bint Abi Salman. There are many, many, many others. And so I did bring the 2 books, and I'd like you to, if you have time, they're in Arabic, of course. I don't know where they are. Oh, you got them? Anyway, but there's so much, I like talking, let's talk about Zubaydah, Harun al-Rashid's wife. When she went to Mecca for the Hajj, on the way, she created places for the pilgrims to stop, water for them to drink. I mean, a lot of these things are so important. We talk about these nuns that are giving their lives to this and that, but we have those too in Islam. Why aren't we talking about them? Why aren't we advertising them? Why aren't we teaching our girls and our boys what the true Islamic practice is? The Quran says, "Inna salat tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar," meaning if you pray, there is a reason for your prayer. So it can prevent you from doing that which is bad. But if it is not doing it, then something is missing in your prayer. And so that's what we need to do. And I will stop right here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You covered such a big subject in,
It's not even that. I mean, I had 3 hours of doing that before.
so
This is 1 hour.
if you are not doing anything, we'll sit and listen for 2 more hours.
No, 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 no. These are the 2 books. So anybody who knows Arabic who want to look at them, you may do so. There are a lot of information. Just browse through them. They're fascinating. I mean, when I read that, it was so inspiring because in today's culture, we don't hear much about women. I wanted to mention 3 women. One of them is Amina Wadud. I don't know if any of you have heard about her.
Contemporary women.
Yes. She led the prayer in New York, Friday prayer, and she was chastised. But she did write a book about women in the Quran, and it was very good. She and I were doing our PhD work together, and I know her very well. The other one who is really good is Marnisi. She is from Morocco. She did a very good job. She has also another book, but she has been maligned. I was lecturing in West Virginia, University of West Virginia, and one guy said she did. He started slandering her. Why? Because she challenged certain hadith, because it did not corroborate with the mercy and the justice of the Quran. And I told him no.
Any questions or comments?
Boy, I covered everything, huh?
Either your lecture was so good that there were no questions, or they were all sleeping.
You think so?
Any questions or comments?
Question here.
Oh, yeah.
As a partner,
Hold.
طول بالك.
on a comparative note, we never see knowledge that there is an imam who leads the prayer a lady. So can you please comment and give us some
No, I
ideas?
won't. I don't see any problem with women leading the prayer. The problem is the situation where she would be standing as she leads the prayer in a mixed group. I mean, women can lead prayer when there are all women. I've done it many times, but all women, but not with men and women. And that is an issue. And, anyway, so I would not comment on it because I think it's important that the way we pray, there should be a separation. The men on one side, the women on the other side, I think. And I want to thank Imam Yala for calling me and thanking me
Well,
for
it's-
coming. I appreciate your call quite a bit. That was a surprise. You have a good voice, by the way.
It's time for Zohar prayers. Thank you very much. And thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.